Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to continue on from our topic of the last video, which was this idea of urban systems. And if you'll remember, what I had mentioned was we're going to go through a couple of different concepts or ideas that relate back to this idea of urban systems. Remember, basically when we talk about the urban system, all we're referring to is a network of urban areas that are somehow interconnected or interrelated. So one of the things we want to ask ourselves is, why is it that these urban systems develop? How is it they develop? And then what is going to be their impact on the landscape? Whether we're talking about the built landscape, whether we're talking about the population as a whole, whether we're talking about the economic landscape, all those things are going to be important when we're understanding this network of relationships. So one of the things that we're going to look at, and one of the most important and probably popular theories or models that's a part of this urban systems, is what's called the central place theory or the central place model. This was developed by the geographer Walter Christaller, and the whole purpose of his model or his theory that he puts together is just to explain the different patterns of urban land use. So really what he's looking at is the relationship of urban spaces to each other and also the surrounding area, and through that looking at the distribution of the built landscape, distribution of the population, as well as the distribution of services, because the way that he looks at it, there's a very important connection between the services of a place, the population of a place, and the distribution of those urban centers. Now, like all the other models or all the other theories we've looked at, we have to remember that this is going to take place in an ideal world where all things are equal. Okay, so we're talking about that flat, perfect landscape. There are no barriers, artificial barriers, all those types of things. People are perfectly rational. Okay, those are all going to be a part of Walter Christaller's central place theory. So when we look at the central place theory, the central place model, there's four important concepts or ideas that we need to understand that are a part of his model. The first one is this idea of the urban center. Now, in his particular theory or his particular model, the urban center serves almost exclusively as a center for providing services. Okay, and so that's pretty much the main function of the city, not necessarily to provide housing or manufacturing products or anything like that, but he sees them as centers of service provision. So not only does the urban center provide services for the people that are living in the urban center, but also the people that are living around the urban center, out to the place what he calls the hinterland, those regions, those reaches that exist outside of the urban area. Now, of course, with that, we're going to have to understand this idea of transportation, independent modes of transportation, and mobility that's going to allow people to move around. But that's kind of understood within the model. The second idea of the model that's important is what's called threshold. The threshold is the minimum number of people that are required in order to support a service. Now, the higher the threshold, what that means is the more people that are required, the higher the minimum number that's required in order to support a service. Typically, not typically, well, what happens is when we have what's called a higher order service, typically that is going to be a more unique form of service. The higher the threshold of that service is going to be. Now, what you also notice is that the more unique, the higher the threshold, the fewer of those types of services that you're going to find on the landscape. Because of the fact that they are unique, they require a higher threshold, a higher population, then the landscape is not going to be able to support as many of those types of economic activities. So whether we're talking about the fine arts, so some sort of symphony orchestra, whether we're talking about a professional athletic team, so whether it's baseball, basketball, football, whether we're talking about very expensive restaurants, high-end hotels, high-end medical services, whether we're talking about plastic surgery, okay, those types of things. And then, of course, on the opposite end, we have what's called lower order services that are going to have lower thresholds. And moving down the scale, you're talking about maybe casual dining, restaurant experiences, a place like a Chili's, a place like a Longhorn Steakhouse. Obviously, those are lower down the end, and even lower would be fast food restaurants. And those would need even fewer people, which means that you tend to see more of them on the landscape. Now, similar to this idea of threshold is what's called the range of goods and services. Now, this is related is because the range is considered the maximum distance that people are willing to travel in order to obtain a good or service. Now, very similar to this idea of threshold, the more unique the service, typically the higher the threshold, the higher the range of that good or service is going to be as well. So the higher order service, the more specialized, the more unique, the further that people are willing to travel in order to obtain that particular good or service. So it's going to include a lot more people that are participating in that particular good or service. So typically also, just like the fact that that activities that are of higher threshold, typically those are also going to be of higher range. And because of the fact that they're higher threshold, they're going to require people to travel from further distances in order to support that particular economic activity. So again, just like we look at the previous example of threshold, the more unique the activity, so whether we're talking about, again, maybe fine dining experiences, really high-end restaurants, professional athletic teams, whether we're talking about a symphony, maybe an art museum, people are willing to travel much further distances for those things as opposed to maybe a minor league baseball team, to go to the movie theaters, to go eat at a casual dining restaurant. And people are willing to travel even less distances to go to fast food restaurants. So hopefully that helps you understand that idea of higher range and service. Range and threshold. Now, when we were talking about the fact that all things are equal, we're living in an ideal world, that is where we're going to come up with this idea of spatial competition. Because the urban centers are places that are providing services to people, essentially the cities themselves compete with each other in order to provide services. So what's going to happen is these urban centers are competing with each other, and so as a result, they are going to be equally distributing themselves among the landscape so that they do not infringe upon each other's territory, so that they can maximize the amount of money that they're going to be making. Very similar to that idea of Hotelling's theory, where you have kind of this perfect distribution of businesses so they can take advantage of as most of the market as possible. So we have under Christaller's theory, we should have a perfect spatial distribution of various types of urban centers across the entire landscape at perfect distances from each other. And so what it looks like is going to be that hexagon shape that hopefully you've seen in your textbook, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But again, when we look at Christaller's model and we look at the different types of settlements, what we're going to find is that the economic functions of those particular settlements are going to dictate the location of that settlement in relationship to each other. Now, the most important part of the model is what's called the central place. Essentially, the model revolves around the central place. The central place is an urban center that has a high population, services and goods that include that have both high thresholds and high ranges, and they exist to serve those that not only are in the urban center or the central place, but also that those are around that particular central place. Okay, and we talked about that a little bit. That's what's called the hinterland. Now, as a result of that, because these settlements exist as places of services, Christaller's model is going to take the shape of a series of hexagons. Now, the reason that it becomes a series of hexagons is because this is the shape that represents a way in which no geographic location is going to be unserved. Because again, they're service areas. So if I took my shapes and I made a series of circles, because that's typically what we think of when we think of service areas, and I'm sure you've seen this illustration probably, it's impossible for me to put circles together and I had this space. What that means is that I have people that are not being served, and we know that in the world of services that's not going to happen because something's going to come in and kind of fill that particular space. So this is what we get. Okay, this idea of the central place theory. Now, I have two illustrations, and we'll look at both of them because I think both of them are helpful in understanding this idea of central place. Now, what you'll notice is we have a particular order or an urban hierarchy. Okay, so we have the central city, the central place, which is the largest. We have the town, the market town, and the village. So we go from highest to largest, and we see kind of the market area for those particular things. Now, what you should notice is that on this map, or on this model, we only have one central place. Okay, that's because it's the largest place. It contains the goods and services that have the highest thresholds and the highest ranges. Okay, and so all the people in all the areas that exist around the central place can come to the central place to participate in the unique economic activities that exist in it. Now, what you'll notice is that the next highest order on the urban hierarchy is the town. They are the next they are the type of settlement that are the next, that have the next fewest, I guess I should say, number of settlements. Again, that's because if you had more of these, then they would not be able to exist, because the perfect competition wouldn't be there, and one of those would actually end up dying out. So not only do we have a smaller number of them, but you should notice that they are equidistant apart from each other. Same thing with the market town. Okay, they're equidistant from each other, but they're also equidistant from the other types. Of settlements. And then, of course, the smallest is going to be the village. Okay. Now, the other thing that we find is that as we move down the urban hierarchy, we're going to find that the fewer forms of unique goods and services that we'll find. In fact, in the village, you would find the most basic, the lowest level of all goods and services. And as we move up, we find higher order goods and services. Now, what we find is that, again, the most unique are going to be found in the central place. Now, the low order services will be found in all of them, because the low order services serve the basic functions of the settlement. Okay, and those are there for the people actually within the settlement. So the people of the village can go to either the town or the market town to experience higher order goods or services. Now, the town is probably going to have higher orders of goods and services than the market town. So, if they want something, they probably can go to the town. Now, again, the people of the village can only experience certain high order of goods and services if they're able to go to the city, and that's where the professional sports teams, the art museums, and things like that are going to be. Again, if we had more of those types of goods and services, the higher order goods and services, things with higher range and higher threshold, they wouldn't be able to exist, because of that idea of perfect competition. They would be pulling customers away from each other, and one of them would fail. Now, this is typically the type that you see when you look at Christaller's model. Okay. Again, it's that idea of perfect spatial distribution, not only of settlement, but also of types of services. So here's the city, the town. You see how they exist equidistant from each other, also from the city. And then here are a few more cities, so that helps you to understand the distribution here. Here are the cities. Notice how, again, the cities are equidistant from each other. The towns are equidistant from the various cities. Then you have the villages are equidistant from each other, but also equidistant from all the towns, as well as the different central cities. And then you have, in this case, we call them the hamlets. You just have different names for it. So, and they're pretty much the same thing. Okay, the higher order settlements to the lower order settlements. And again, the higher order the settlement, the higher the form of good or service, the higher the range, and the higher the threshold. Okay, and that's all that we're going to have time for this time. When we come back, we're going to talk about this idea of the urban hierarchy and how we can see that in various cities around the world. So I hope you found that to be helpful, and I hope to see you next time.